When I was 7 years old, I got the first 4 Harry Potter books for Christmas. I raced through the first 3 of them before it was time to go back to school, and I've loved almost everything Harry Potter ever since. I eagerly awaited the next books and got them all at midnight. I saw all the movies as soon as possible. I met my best friend when I discussed Harry Potter with a near stranger. I experienced roller coasters of emotion at the last book release and the last movie release. I got to college and started playing Quidditch. That one still surprises me. The point is, Harry Potter has been a consistent part of my life for almost as long as I can remember. Even though the last book and last movie have been released, and even though the last movie release represented the end of my childhood, that doesn't mean I have to leave it in my past. I'll carry it into new phases of my life, like parenting. I'm excited to share the magic with my future kids, and remember what that felt like for me. That's not all there is to it, though. I'm planning to use Harry Potter to teach my children values. I think a problem with trying to teach values is that it can come off as preachy. I'm not a fan of using Aesop's fables as a way to teach lessons or morals, for example. Sure, the tortoise and the hare has cute animals, but I also see it as a contrived story just to get to a point. Harry Potter doesn't have that issue. The story has its own purpose, and lessons happen along the way. Kids get drawn in by the magic and excitement, and may not consciously realize that there's more to it than that. So, I'm going to show you what I'm planning to do. Most of our generation isn't ready for parenting quite yet, but it's not so far off that we can't think about it. We've grown up with Harry Potter, and we can choose to keep it in our adult lives. Doing so is something that can benefit your children as well as you. Let's look at some things we can learn from Harry Potter. Just to be clear, the examples I'm using are based on the events from the books. So, let's start with open-mindedness. Specifically, open-mindedness to the fact that you could be wrong. That's something that Cornelius Fudge didn't display, and we'll see how doing so would have helped him. When Voldemort regained strength in a body at the end of Goblet of Fire, Harry tried to tell people this right away. Unfortunately, few people besides his friends and Dumbledore believed him. The Minister of Magic didn't believe that Voldemort could be back, mainly because he didn't want to believe that Voldemort would be back. It would complicate the Minister's life and job too much if Voldemort was back. So, he operated for an entire year under the impression that he wasn't back. Dementors turned up in a Muggle town and happened to find a wizard. Fudge decided that there had been no Dementors, and that Harry was lying to cover up his illegal use of magic. Later, there was a mass breakout of Death Eaters from Azkaban. Fudge assumed it had something to do with the previously escaped Sirius Black. For Fudge, neither of these events could have anything to do with the Dementors' loyalty turning to Lord Voldemort. It took Lord Voldemort actually showing up in the Ministry of Magic before it occurred to him that Harry had been telling the truth. Now, depending on the age of your child and how quickly they pick up concepts, you can ask them a variety of questions. Would you have believed Harry at first? Would you have believed him after the other events happened? Why do you think Fudge didn't believe him? What would have happened differently if Fudge had believed that Voldemort was back? That last question should seal the deal. Your child should realize that things would have been much different if Fudge had prepared the Ministry to fight Voldemort right away, instead of giving him a year to regain power and build up his base of followers. Hopefully, your child will believe that this is preferable to what actually happened, and they'll realize that it wouldn't have been an issue if Fudge had been open-minded to the possibility of Voldemort being back. Now, let's talk about perseverance. Dumbledore wanted Harry to learn occlumency. It seemed like a useful enough skill, and continuing to let Voldemort inside his head wasn't a great option. The problem was, Dumbledore thought the best person to teach Harry was Snape. They suffered through some miserable lessons, just tolerating each other, until Harry's curiosity got the better of him when Snape left him alone with a pensieve full of his memories. Harry went inside and witnessed Snape's worst memory, which involved him being humiliated by James. Snape was furious about this, and made it clear that he was done teaching Harry occlumency. Harry lied about why his lessons were done, and how proficient he was at occlumency. This wasn't a huge problem until the end of the year, when Harry had a vision of Voldemort torturing Sirius at the Ministry. Sirius was safe, actually, and the vision was Voldemort's way of luring Harry to the Department of Mysteries. It worked perfectly. Harry and his friends went off to the Ministry, followed later by members of the Order of the Phoenix, who had realized that the students were in danger. One of these members was Sirius, who ended up being killed in battle. Now, the really unfortunate thing is that we can argue that his death was Harry's fault. If he'd been practicing occlumency like he was supposed to, Voldemort wouldn't have been able to plant the false vision in his head. he wouldn't have seen Sirius being tortured and rushed to save him. These points will come up in the discussion with your child. Should Harry have tried harder at occlumency? Should he have kept going once Snape stopped teaching him? What would have happened if Harry was skilled at occlumency and hadn't seen this vision? If Harry had persevered to learn occlumency, would Sirius have died when he did? By this point, your child should realize that persevering to learn occlumency would have been well worth the effort. Now, I want to talk about a situation where doing the right thing paid off. Depending on what specifically you want to teach your child, you might call it fairness, or integrity. You might even say it's sportsmanship, because it was doing the right thing during a competition, the Triwizard Tournament. The point is, there are some versatile situations in Harry Potter. How you look at them depends on what exactly you want your child to get out of them. So, a few days before the first task, Hagrid asked Harry to meet him at midnight. It turned out this was so that he could show Harry some dragons that the champions would be facing in the first task. Now, Harry wasn't the only champion who knew about the dragons. Hagrid also took Madame Maxime on his idea of a date and showed her. Harry bumped into Karkaroff on his way back to the castle. Harry assumed that Karkaroff would find the dragons and he'd tell Krum, and Madame Maxime would tell Fleur. This left Cedric as the only champion who wouldn't know. Now, Harry could have put himself at an advantage by leaving Cedric at a disadvantage. Sure, 2 other champions had an advantage too, but Harry could have prepared as much as possible in the few days he had left, and hoped that an unprepared Cedric would have to come in last, and placing above Cedric would be a good thing for Harry. There was that large faction of people who didn't believe that Harry didn't enter himself in the tournament. For many students, this led not only to pro-Cedric feelings, but to anti-Harry feelings. Harry's success and Cedric's failure might have changed some minds. Harry warned Cedric about the dragons anyway. Cedric was described as being suspicious twice during that exchange, while Harry couldn't come up with a reason for telling him besides, "It's just fair, isn't it?" In other words, Cedric thought this decency could be due to ulterior motives, while Harry couldn't imagine another option except decency. So, decency's nice and all. But since decency for decency's sake probably won't convince every child, let's fast forward to the payoff. A month after the first task, Harry still hadn't figured anything out about the second task. He had an egg that wailed at him every time he opened it, and that was all. So Cedric gave him the strange advice to go take a bath with the egg, and gave him the password to the prefect's bathroom so that he was less likely to be disturbed. Harry didn't do anything with this advice right away, but as the task approached and he wasn't making any progress any other way, he acted on the advice. It turned out water was the key, because the egg was producing mermaid song that only made sense underwater. So bathing wasn't such strange advice after all. So, questions for kids. Was telling Cedric about the dragons the right thing to do? Would you have told him? What if Cedric hadn't given Harry advice later? Was it still the right thing to do? Since everyone but Cedric knew, would it have been wrong to let him go into the task not knowing? The point at which your child realizes the value will depend on the values and lessons you've been teaching them. Maybe they're at a point where Harry telling Cedric demonstrates fairness, and that's good enough for them. Maybe they don't see fairness until Cedric repays Harry. Either way, every child can take something away from the situation. So, those are a few values that you can use Harry Potter to help teach your children. I've shown you how, and now you can pick out the situations that show your most important values. Ask your child questions, and discuss the situations with them. You don't have to shove the values down their throats. If the information is all there, they'll realize the value naturally. And maybe, just maybe, they'll pass it on to their children too.